Hey gang, welcome back to Joe Daddy's Garage. Today's video is part 20 in the 68 Mustang fastback build known as Fangled. Now in a previous video I left off with fitting of the engine and transmission, the headers, and dealing with some of the conflicts with that. Using the mock-up engine that I got from Speedway and the mock-up transmission that I got from Summit really helped resolve some of the fitment problems and creating the opening for the transmission. I'm not going to do any more to that until I have the actual engine and transmission in place. I'm not going to fabricate anything until I know how well that's going to fit. Now that transmission also has some unneeded webbing or lugs built onto it, like built into the casting to hold maybe a wire loom or a component or something along those lines. It's probably not going to be used. Now I'm going to go over some of that later on, and I may be removing some of those because why? If they're in the way and they're going to cause problems, there's no sense in having them. So what I left off with in the last segment was talking about the crossmember and the idea of creating one of my own or coming up with something else. And I have gotten a crossmember from Stifler's. So I'm going to go over the details of that crossmember, and also I'm going to go over some other things dealing with the car itself, like the brake hoses and a few other pieces and parts that are going to interact with the headers and the engine and all those sort of things. So let me show you the crossmember that I ordered and whether I'm going to be able to use it the way that it's designed. So this was ordered through Jegs, if I remember correctly, and it was shipped directly from Stifler's. So I don't know if it would help to order it straight from Stifler's or if it has to be bought through another vendor like Jegs. I don't know. However, this is the part number. TCB 6R80K2 kit. Tells you it comes with the transmission crossmember, the mounting brackets, and transmission mount. So what you get in the kit is the main crossmember piece with a bracket built onto it for the transmission mount. You get some end pieces pre-built. There are some bushings, and there's a pair of bolts that go into those as well. So I have those built up. These bolts go through the end of this. You can see there's some holes, and that's where it goes into the floor supports. There are some spacers. So here are two pieces of plate with 3 holes in them that are going to go here as necessary on this bracket. And then these spacers would go in between your floor support and this piece as necessary. So this is designed for variations in width. This groove right here allows this to move in and out to compensate for that. And then here is a big washer, a smaller washer, and a lock nut for the transmission mount, which is shown right here. It's already, I have it clamped to the mock-up transmission. It's not bolted, but it is up in place, and I'll show you that in a minute. So this is the bracket, this is the big washer and bolt, and there's some bushings that go in between. Here is a configuration showing it with the bolts going through, and then this is just an overall view of this. Now the way this is designed is this logo, as seen here, is facing aft. So this is the driver's side mount, and this is the passenger side mount. And I'm going to have to go over some of those details and show you that underneath the car itself and what I may have to do to make this work if I decide to use it. So as I was saying, the logo faces to the rear of the car. Now if I put this up in place based on how it's assembled, I would have to put it way back here where it's going to fight with the TCI kit. And I don't know if I can find a way to manipulate it to get it up in this area without fighting with these end caps. But for now, it would have to go forward like this. So if I try to turn it around and face it opposite or backwards, it makes it even worse. It puts the bracket way in the back, and I don't see any way to make that work, at least not at this point. So what I'm considering doing is cutting the bracket itself, taking this off of this plate. of the bar. So if I took it off and I turned it around and put it on the back side, I could put this up in front of the TCI setup, and that would be facing to the rear. Now, I may even have to go forward a little more just because of the way the bar is shaped. So there's some things to think about with this configuration. Also, it was brought to my attention, and just kind of suggested, why not come off of this bar? Like, can I configure something that would support the back of the transmission? So I've been looking at this because this bracket, while this is a different design than what was here, the other one is a wide piece with two, I think it has two posts sticking down. I could actually use that, I think, and maybe just build something off of this TCI bar. What I have to consider is making this something that can be taken apart. Like, I don't want to weld something in here that I can't, that would fight the removal of this, because if this has to come out, the real transmission, it needs to come apart, just like if it was a regular car. So I'm going to look at this even further after I get the real engine and transmission in the car, because right now this is just giving me ideas. I'm still considering, like I had mentioned, about cutting out this, what's left of the original crossmember piece, because we're not gaining anything really by having these here. But again, that's going to come into play once I get the other one up there. So just some ideas. Also, the way these are designed, the holes, you can see, are offset, and also the channel is offset. So, it's got some variance there. You could turn these over and use them to help get a different position. So I'm not fully committed to any of this just yet. I'm going to continue to experiment, and I want to show you some other things moving forward that are going to be relatable to the real engine and transmission. So one of the concerns is this shaft coming out of the rack and pinion. So you see, it's got splines on it, and there's a bolt that goes through the universal joint. And I'm a little concerned with how close this is to the header. I know I ran into these problems before, and I'm going to show you something, because while I don't have the actual parts that are going to be used, I do have a reference. So this is a U-joint. I actually have a couple U-joints from another kit that I have, and what they call the DD shaft. And that is, it's got two flats on it, and it's rounded on the opposite sides, and then it's got a groove here for a bolt to go through. So basically that is intended for this. So when it fits around that, the bolts lock it in place. Now, the spline count on this is smaller than what is on that shaft, but I can use this as somewhat of a reference. If I put this up here and just kind of show you where that's interacting, I can't slide it on, so I can't get a true position. If I bring it down some, of course it's offset now, it's not in line. It's really hard to judge that. Like, where does it gonna end up? And that's the difficulty when you don't have the actual parts. Now those parts are coming, as I said previously. So once I get that, I'll be able to further assess that configuration with the headers. And it'll all come into play later, of course, when I put in the real engine as well, because right now, although this is a great mock-up, I don't have no complaints about this, it's only gets you so far. Like, there's still variables built into that, I'm sure, and it's going to matter with the real one more than anything. So at this point, all this will probably be coming out, and I'll be setting the real engine in place and trying to repeat this mock-up. Really, the focus of all this was to get the tunnel cut out for the transmission to fit, so I wasn't fighting with that back and forth with the real setup. So in a previous video, I talked about the brake hose kit for the front and the rear of the car, and I came to the conclusion, through some help, that the front kit has these 90-degree elbows on them, and I'm going to show you why in just a minute. And the rear kit has the straight union. So the other thing that I noticed is the length of the brake hose. Now this is a braided brake hose, really well built, but this one here, which is about probably 15 inches, is for the rear, and then this one, which is closer to maybe 20 inches, somewhere in that range. I don't know exactly, I didn't measure these, but the long ones go to the front, and there's a specific reason for that. So I'm going to show you that, and then also these tabs, which will support the brake hose when it's up against the frame. It also comes with these end pieces, which will interact with these tabs, and the C-clips, which holds them onto those tabs. So that's how that's configured. So I'm going to show you that, and we're going to move on from there. I don't know if I'm going to get these mounted just yet. I also want to point out that the calipers appear, and I would assume there's no reason to consider otherwise, these are the same front and rear. If you look, you have a bleeder at both top and bottom, and top and bottom. You've got your mount point, and this is where your fitting goes. So if I pull that back, I could show you that this is the straight fitting, and that'll end up turning into that location, and that's the same dimensionally as the front one. So it really makes sense. There's no reason to make different versions of these calipers when they serve the same purpose. So I'm going to put that cover back on there, and we're going to go look at the front so I can show you what's going on with that. So I was saying earlier about the caliper, and this one, they look like they're exactly the same. The mounts are all the same, the bleeders, the logo. The only thing I see different is this pin, just for this purpose, is pushing this direction right now, and the pads are already on here because it came assembled to these rotors. And this one, the pin just happens to be going that direction. Not a big deal. But that's exactly the same. So I'm going to go on and show you the brake hoses and how I want to configure them. So just to keep it simple, I'm going to thread this coupler onto the end of the hose, and as I said earlier, that's how this is going to fit onto that. Now, what I want to show you is the facing of this 90-degree elbow. So I'm going to turn this back this direction and take the camera to the front. So here's the 90-degree, and if I take the little sticker off of the caliper, if I get find a loose spot there, take that off, and I'm going to take the 90-degree elbow and turn it into that caliper. Kind of hard to see when I've got it so close to my face that I can't see it. So what I see happening is coming around the coilover shock setup, and I'm just going to thread this on to that 90-degree elbow and show you why I want to do this. Also, if and I may not show up in the camera, but let me just set this roughly where it needs to go, in my opinion. Okay, so you see it comes forward and it clears around this shock. There's plenty of room for that, and also it's kind of pushing us up against the frame rail, and then the bracket, as I mentioned, will hold it and become a standoff. So I have to figure out, as you look at these cars, the original ones had a little 90-degree elbow back here behind the control arms, and that's where the original brake hose attached. So we're going to try to mimic that in a sense, but I'll take that off, and I just want to show you, hopefully this shows up well. If I turn this hard left and keep this in that same location, then it clears everything. There's still plenty of room around the shock and everything else, and you can even anticipate, let's say if you wanted to, you could put it way out here, but I'm not going to do that. I want it to be inside of that arm. The other thing you can do is change the angle. So if I brought this down a little, it's going to keep it away from these components. So I want to try to keep all that in mind when this is being assembled. Just because it's on a flat plane doesn't mean it makes most sense. So a little bit of an angle keeps it out of that ball joint area. Let me turn it the other way and show you from the back. So same idea, have this mounted basically in this location. It's coming underneath the ball joint, clears the arm, the steering arm, and then clears the shock all the way around. And then what I'll end up doing, I don't know how well this is showing up here, what I'll end up doing is putting the tab on and probably have it somewhere in that location. And then with this standoff, it puts it away from this plate. You know, it could actually go, if you wanted to, I mean, if you really wanted to, you could probably wedge it in here, or you could do it another way, but with this plate, it's going to have to be something like this. And that's going to be perfect. It's not going to cause a problem. Gives you clearance for putting it on and any kind of work you may have to do later. So that's probably where it's going to be, somewhere in that location. I looked at the other, and I'll post a picture of it. I took a picture of the original frame rail, and the original bolt mount was right about there. So I think it'll work fine. Just a little bit of weld, and it'll be on. So there it is. I welded the tab on pretty much in the same location as it would have been at the factory. And you can see it's right behind this control arm. So I feel like that's a pretty good spot. If needed, and I don't expect to, but if needed, I can cut that off and bring it forward maybe half an inch or something. I just wanted to have room here, you know, to have clearance for the nut here on the end of the hose, and of course the fitting. So I do have some brake line, and this is kind of what I see it doing, is coming out of the end of the hose fitting here and going up. And normally it would have gone through, I think, one of these holes. I don't remember which one. Probably go in that hole. There's two there, and you know, go from there. So there's room here. If I take this wheel and I push this all the way back to where it stopped, you can see there's room. I can get my whole hand inside of that, no problem. So I don't think it's going to be a concern at all. But again, if it is, I can cut things loose. That's the nice part about welding. If something's not right, undo it, fix it. So right now the braided hose is free. It's not touching anything, and that's what you want. In fact, this could probably have been a couple inches shorter. I think I measured this hose at the end of the fittings. It's 21.5 inches, and I almost feel like they could have maybe been an 18-inch hose, you know, because there's a lot out here. Not that it really matters much, but it would have tucked it back closer to that spring, and might have looked a little bit better to have just a shorter hose. But this is what comes in the kit, so that's what we're using. So now that I have the front brake hoses in a good position, I'm going to move on to the back. So I was going through the packaging here, and of course, as I mentioned, this caliper is the same front or rear. Also, there is this package, which is genuine wilwood performance products, and this is the bolt kit for installing the caliper. So you end up with 4 bolts and a whole bunch of washers. And I was curious about that, thinking, why do you need so many washers? Well, when I looked at the front brake, I found that there were 2 washers on the mating surface on the inside here, and then an outer washer and a small washer on the head of the bolt. What I think that is intended for, at least my assumption is, kind of as a shimming process, to where you can move the caliper in and out. At this point, there's no adjustment. It's like when you look at a modern vehicle and it has self-adjusting calipers, they move as the pads wear out. I feel these aren't going to do that because it's pressing basically from both sides. So if I can get in here and maybe show you, here is the caliper. There is a single washer, and then there's a smaller washer in the head of the bolt. And near as I can tell, there's 2 small washers in here. Now, what I'm going to do is attempt, I'm going to show you some conflict here, attempt to mount this caliper. So you'll notice you've got this plate here, and it has these captive head bolts or Allen head bolts, 1, 2, 3. And the caliper bolts are here and here. Let me get the caliper and show you a conflict. So under the loose assumption that there will be 2 washers here and 2 washers up here to a start point, I'm going to put a bolt through the upper, add the 2 washers, and then try to get that bolt, or put that bolt in place, hopefully without blocking too much here. So I'm going to slide that over. And as I said, I think this is intended as a way to index or let the caliper be adjusted in or out. So let me just get that bolt in place. So that's basically the mount for that. Now, this is where we have some conflict. And hopefully I'm in a good position where you can see what's going on. Let me lower the camera just a little bit here. Now, I know TCI doesn't like me showing problems. They've talked about it. But if I put the 2 washers here, even if, let's say I don't even put the 2 washers there. Let's just try to put a bolt in. Okay, so that's not going to work. However, you can rotate this up and put the bolt through and then wiggle the bolt back out. Oh, wait a minute. Guess what? The bolt won't go in. Like, there's no clearance. This assembly here, which obviously we need it for the panhard bar and all that, it's fighting the distance available between the bracket and the bolt. So what I'd considered was, well, maybe these bolts here, the captive head bolts that I talked about earlier, maybe those are meant to be your assembly. Like, take these bolts out and pull the bracket and the caliper off. However, one of those bolts is also behind, it's hard to show you this, but it's behind this bracket. So even if you wanted to do that, it's way down inside and behind that bracket. So while I don't like to, or shouldn't have to, modify things, and again, TCI doesn't like me talking about this, or like, hey, call the tech department. But the reality is there's nothing to change that. So let me just rotate this up, take this bolt out, and show you that you can get it in there if everything is dead on and perfect. But once you put it, that's with a slight angle, right? So once you put this in, you can't angle the bolt. I mean, you can't. So I'm going to think about this a minute. I may have to grind down just a little bit on this angle just to clean it back, just cup it a little bit. I'm sure it's not going to hurt anything. This is a very solid piece, 1/4 inch thick, very strong. But my point is, if you have to do some maintenance on this or change pads or something, you're fighting with it. And it just doesn't make any sense. So maybe they need to cup this a little in their design to allow room for this bolt. The other alternative would be to cut off maybe a thread or so off of the bolt, but then that takes away from the function of the bolt. So I'm going to end up having to cup this out right here to make room for that bolt. Now I'm using the 4.5 inch grinder with the sanding disc on it, and I'm just being cautious. I'm not in a hurry. I'm not going to get aggressive here. I'm just trying to knock that edge down slightly. So I switched over from the grinder to the sanding belt, basically, and I just couldn't get the grinder up in there any further. So cleaned up that edge. I went over it with some sandpaper as well, just to make sure it was really smooth. And then I do the test fit of the caliper. So put the upper bolt in, and then carefully assemble the lower bolt with the washers that act as a spacer, and feed those in there. Use both hands to get the bolt started. A little tricky, but it works. Get the bolt snugged down, and then I verified that I could tighten everything up with a wrench. And at this point, I was feeling pretty good about how things were going. Well, the caliper fits now. I didn't remove a whole lot of material. You can see where the tape is. I just blended that slightly, and I was able to get the bolt in place. So that's taken care of. However, I have a new dilemma. So now the brake hose fitting lines up directly with this top portion of this bracket. I don't understand. This kit, this rear assembly, has a parking brake built into it. And so it has the brake shoes, which interact with the inside of the rotor, the drum built into the rotor. So you have that mount up there for the cable, and then that's your pull on top. So there's no removing that. There's nowhere to go with that bracket. And I was looking at the idea of maybe putting the caliper on the front, but it won't work. There's these spacers here that support this. Then there's this little nub that guides the brake shoe. So that's available there. I did take the other caliper and I held it up in place at this location, and you can't get around this. There is no way to get around that, at least not the way I see it. I looked at the idea of maybe rotating this, but it would have to rotate up, because if you came down, then that fitting would be inside of that cutout for the bracket there. So just to give you an idea, here is the brake hose. And I mean, I can't even get a fitting in there. I can't put the straight one. I can't put the 90. I'm not sure what's supposed to happen here. I'm going to contact TCI. You can see there's a cutout right there. And I'm wondering if that cutout was not supposed to be back here, and then you thread on a 90-degree elbow to get the brake line or brake hose to come up and then go forward. So something's out of the ordinary, and I don't quite get it. So I guess possibly I'll have to make a cutout here around this opening, and then use, instead of the straight one, use a 90-degree so I can come up. I don't know. I'll talk to them, but for now I'm kind of stumped. So I've been looking at this and trying to come up with a solution. I was on the phone with Sal, who is apparently the vice president of TCI, and he said basically that whenever they build these, they're not intended to be exact for, say, your vehicle. The intention is they put it together and then they send it to you, and then it's up to you to make adjustments. He said a lot of times guys will just take all this apart, meaning this, you know, the axles and everything else, because they're going to powder coat this rear end, and so this supposedly is just a rough configuration. So I want to show you some things. I know I talked about it earlier, about the caliper. So I've already demonstrated the intent is for this to go on like this, and the idea that this plumbing line ends up in line with this part of the brace here for the panhard bar. And so whenever he was talking about them or people swapping things around, I thought maybe this bracket could be turned around, because right now it's actually, this part is angled up. So I've taken it loose. It took some effort to get it off because they use Loctite on these, as they should. And so nice long bolts, you can see the Loctite there. I'm going to take these out. Try not to block too much of the camera. And when I do that, and this is where I get a little iffy about, I understand what he's saying, I do. But I get a little concerned because, okay, so this sits like this, and when I take this off, I notice that right here on the plate, it has an LH. Hopefully you can see that. LH is a part number. I know that light's not helping right now. So LH 5328 AMM. All right. So if that's on like this, and I take it and flip it over, it's not going to work. A couple reasons for that. I'm going to switch the camera to the side so you can see. And I'm doing this as a demonstration so that you can not have the fight that I'm having. I'm not trying to pick at them too much, but obviously whenever somebody put this together, they already knew the caliper was going to go here, and the center line of that caliper lines up here, and it lines up there. So they should know that. So if I flip this over, it angles downward, and that's not going to help. In fact, these holes, these three holes, are only indexed to match like this. So if you flip this over, you lose that. You end up with that top hole. This one is now too low, and this one's also too low. But just to demonstrate, if I put the bracket back on, then it'll also show you, hopefully, that the angle is not an angle that I prefer. Now, what I mean by that is the caliper is going to sit at a lower angle. And I'm sure it's going to work fine. They're not that critical, but just for appearance purposes, okay. The other side of that is if I do that, if I line this up, and I know center line, right, of the caliper. Let me come back this way a little bit. So center line of the caliper is now here. What that allows for, if I were to do it this way, or if it works flipping these over, is I can put the elbow in on the caliper, thread that on, or thread that in, let's say, and then, oh, and I also need to point out too, these bushings are flipped over now. So the fat part of the bushing is on this side normally, but right now it's on the other side. But if I put this up here and thread that bolt in without seeing what I'm doing, what that actually does is it puts that elbow inside of this cavity. Let me show you part 2 of that. So I put the hose on now, right? You can see it's coming forward. I can take it, run it inside that cavity and up through the notch that is at the top of this support brace. And again, this is just kind of experimenting just to see what's going to work. Because they had told me, I had posted on Instagram and on Facebook, of course, and on Instagram they were trying to tell me, you just take this assembly and rotate it 180 degrees. The problem with that is it puts your parking brake back here. The cable would have to come in from down low because the parking brake's way up here right now. So if you rotate that, now it's down here and it's facing the wrong way. So that's not going to work. But with this configuration, and again, this is just a quick mock-up, this hose now comes out up at the top. Let me show you. So here is where that hose comes through now. So it may work in doing what they're saying, swapping this whole bracket assembly, everything, this way. So not 180 around, but side to side, and flip it over. That'll end up putting the caliper at a slight angle. Not a big deal. I've seen pictures of these where the caliper's way up here. I've seen it in the front. You know, allows for variations of that. The alternative, in my mind, and I'm going to swap these and see how it comes out. But the alternative in my mind is if I'm going to have this flat or vertical, then I would need to cut a notch in here to make room for that elbow to stick up. And I'm not trying to overthink this. I'm just trying to emphasize what you may have to do if you're trying to put one of these together. Now, if I were to do a notch up here, I would probably add a gusset this way. I would come at an angle and come back over to this side to support this. Now, what Sal was telling me, he doesn't like this to be modified because that weakens the structure for this panhard bar. Well, it's already got this notch up here anyway, but I understand what he's saying. If you cut a notch here, now you've got a flex point. So by adding the gusset, that would reinforce it, or I could even come up with a couple different ways to attach things. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the axles out, much as I hate to do it, and swap these side to side and see what happens. I will say typically this is not something I would want to do. I wanted to experiment though and see if I could swap these assemblies and make them work. So it's really nice with the Ford setup. You've got 4 bolts that hold the axle in place. So once you get those 4 bolts loose, as you'll see here, I use the cordless to take those out. Then you can pull on the axle and it'll just basically slide right out. Now, if it's an older vehicle, you may have to use a slide hammer or something to get it to move. When I pulled that out, those 2 little plates fell out. So I just wanted to verify where they were. You can see the witness marks on that plate where the nuts had tightened down on it. And the other one is a retainer that goes against the bearing on the axle. So I started working on the passenger side, doing the same thing and taking that loose. And in that process, I was just getting ready to start taking the bolts off with the cordless, and I had a phone call. And you can see here I just stopped because I got a phone call from Sal. So let me tell you what Sal had to say. Okay, changing direction. As I talked to Sal on the phone, he called while I was in the middle of doing the removal of the axles. And so we talked about this. He actually sent me some pictures of some of the hardware or some of the parts that he has on hand at their shop out in California. And he does not understand how this is in line with that. Some of the pictures he showed me, this is the caliper is slightly above, or there's a different configuration. So we don't know if there's something going on with the wilwood setup, if they've changed something. That's just a thought. However, in the discussion we talked about stuff we could do to remedy this, and we aren't going to flip around the hardware. We're not going to swap this side to side. It won't help. It may even make it worse because of the parking brake setup. So what we talked about was actually creating a notch right here in this section. And what I want to show you is some of the detail that I'm going to deal with. So this is the other caliper. And if you can, I don't know how well you can see how deep that is. Those threads are in there. They go down about a ½ an inch. So like this 90 degree can fully bottom out into that. And I initially did not want to do that on test fitting. Like I did not want to crank this all the way down in there, and I still don't want to do that. But it gives you an idea how far you can go. So there's like probably 7 or 8 threads there, and then this distance from there to there. So we can do some math. You know, you can measure how much is there, which is about maybe a 1/2 inch. You could measure the thread count, see where that's at, and then measure what's available up there. So currently, this distance says, even though it's on a taper, the max distance maybe just about 3/8 of an inch on the lower side, and maybe 1/4 on the upper side. So my intent here is to modify this slightly. So if I take this screwdriver and insert it into that, that gives me an alignment of where it's at as far as how it's going to interact with this arm. So if I draw around that, that gives me just the basics of where that notch needs to be. Now, I don't want a hard square notch. What I may end up doing, and there's some variations to this, you know, when you're working with metal, like in the aircraft industry, you would create a curve so you don't deal with a corner. And in this instance, if I take this elbow and I put it up there, you can see that that's at full extension. And with the, if I mark that, and I'm not going to go this far, but if I put this in and then mark the back side of that, that's a little bit deep. And again, I'm not going to go that deep. So what I'll probably end up doing, at least in my initial thought, is take a big drill bit and drill a hole right in here. And that'll give me a radius on each side. It won't be a square cut, like a cutoff wheel. Give me a round hole, and then I can cut here and remove that piece, and then I can radius these corners off so it'll look like a nice curve. That's going to be my initial approach. I think that'll get me a good start. So I'm going to take this back off and see how much I can not remove to make this work. Now if I need to, I can make this kind of short and then test fit. And if I need to radius a little more, I can take my rotary file and clean that edge up, make it a little bit deeper if I need to. Ideally, you don't want any sharp corners. And when I was talking to Sal, he had said, I may not need a gusset as I suggested, because this is really thick metal. This is 1/4 inch. And I could maybe put an internal gusset or something like that if need be. But at this point, we're just going to open that up and see what happens. Let me start by saying that I had started to drill the marking that I had indicated, and I could not get the drill in there. I've been having trouble with my air compressor, so I've been having to use my cordless tools, and I could not get it to fit. So I decided to remove the shock and lower the axle down so that I could get the drill in there. Once I did that, I was able to get that in place and drill through with a smaller bit. I did not want to go with a large one to start with because I'd created a pilot hole basically. Now once I had that addressed, I moved on to a larger bit. This was probably 3/8, I think, maybe a little bigger. I don't remember the exact dimensions of it. Not that it really matters. All I was trying to do is create the start of a circle or a radius in the depth of that cutout. So now I'm cutting off the material that is on the outside so that I can create the channel that I want. And let me just tell you also that this section of this video was probably about an hour long. And I did it in time lapse because I knew it would take a while. But I've edited it down quite a bit just to try to go over the highlights of what I was doing. So I test fitted, did some more sanding. I used the sanding disc here instead of the cutoff wheel that I was using previously, and just smoothing up those corners, trying to make everything fit nice. I attempted this several times. I put the caliper in. I realized it actually has to slide in from the top now. You can't just go in kind of random. You have to go in from the top and bring it down into that channel. And so repeated that multiple times. And it's frustrating, I know. And I'm not necessarily saying that it's something that TCI did wrong, but there's obviously something wrong, because even Sal communicated that with me, that this shouldn't happen. They've got tooling where they make these things, and it shouldn't happen. And my point of all this is I want to make sure that if there has to be some maintenance done on this thing at some point, that it can be done. You saw there I took this back apart because I realized I had to put the bottom bolt in first, come in basically vertically, come down into the channel, put the bottom bolt in, get it started, and then move to the top. But like I was saying, once you have to do some maintenance on this. You can't design it or build it in a way that it's going to hinder that process. I want to make sure this car can be worked on later on, just in case, because you never really know, and it's better to be safe than sorry. So I don't know how well this shows up, because I can't get the camera in here simply because I've got floor pan in the way. But if I put this light under there, and I can't see what the camera's seeing, hopefully that is highlighting the space that is now around that fitting, so you can see it there. And that dimension, that cutout, is no wider than this upper portion where this notch is. So this is just right about 1/2 inch, maybe a little under, and this is the same. So you can see I've got clearance around this. I've already had the caliper on and off a few times. And now, and it's probably not even necessary, I just like to restore the strength that was there. And after talking with Sal at TCI and showing him some pictures, basically I have this piece of 1/4 inch steel, and this was part of that box channel that went around the floor support, that little piece that I cut off. So I've trimmed that down, and essentially this will go underneath that and get welded into place. And what that'll do is it spreads the load across that gap. And I'm not going to weld it today. I'm not going to get in there and do anything with it. I'm just showing you what's going to happen, because this is all going to come back out anyway, and it'll be a lot easier to address when I can flip this over and weld it. But that's going to take care of that. And then I could take the brake hose, put it on here. Now of course all of this still needs to be inside of the wheel, the tire, right? You don't want to have this going up like this and having the tire possibly hit it. So I'll probably end up putting a bracket somewhere forward and to the inside of the frame rail. And I'll review this as I go through it, because right now it looks like it's not an issue to run that forward like that. But what I may end up doing, and this is still, I'm confident with this, but if I need to, I can change this 90 to a 45, so it actually angles it slightly more inboard, so it'd be like that. So there's still some room to experiment and change some things if I need to. So I'm not going to commit at the moment to where the mount tab is going to be, because there's a lot of places it can go, and it's not going to make a huge difference as long as it's got a nice solid anchor point. Now, I'm happy with how this is turning out, and I think I'm going to move on to another phase. And I don't know if I showed this earlier. I don't know how well it's showing up on the camera. Things get kind of tight back here whenever you have the top of the cars, or the bottom of the cars right here. So if you'll notice, I drew a line up here, and that line is representative of the tire. So when I put the tire on before, the tire and wheel that I have, just when I have the old Jade set up, the 17 by 9 with a 4.5 inch back spacing, the tire actually hit. And if you remember, I had to put washers on the outside of the rotor to push the wheel out just a little bit to make clearance, but that was still right up against it. So I talked with the owner, and what I'm going to do is cut this square, let's say, and allow this piece to go inboard, and then angle this back and maybe make a filler or whatever to clean that up. So I've already looked inside the car. I don't see any issue with that. So I'm going to cut this open and start modifying this and be done with what I'm doing here. This is not relative anymore. I think I'm happy with all this. Once I had these lines drawn, I wanted to indicate where that center point was, or where the meeting point was for the two lines, or the three lines basically that came together. And the reason for that was I'm going to have to cut this from the inside. So I needed a start or stop point with that. So I did the first cut from the outside of the car, and then I went inside and I drew a line in that same location. Now, using the shape of the wheelhouse and where I had drilled that hole, I could draw that line, and then it gave me a way to cut that and stay right on the mark. So once I cut that one, I switched over and I cut the other line that intersects that one so that I could have that area free. Once I did that, I kind of nudged up the bottom part of that flange so that it could sit on top of the inner flange. I did not want to cut everything apart or, cut off more material than I needed. So by bumping that up and being able to nudge that in, it allowed for movement. Now here I'm just using the vice grips to hold it in place and make adjustments as I needed to with the mallet. And I'm just trying to get the metal to stretch a little bit so that it is more relaxed in the end. I decided I needed to remove some more metal inside here, so I did a little more cutting just to give it that space. And others have talked about they've done this in a similar way, or they've done it to where they've even gone deeper in with this flange. But I think in this case, what I've done is going to suit the needs we're going to have with the eventual tires and wheels that are going to go on the car. So here's how I did this. I basically went from the corner of this impression that is built into these wheelhouses, and I just came down into a rough area. Like, I did not even measure, or I just kind of drew a line. But on this side, what I ended up doing, if I can get in here, is I came up and I made this cut. This lines up with, I'll show you in a second on the other side. I'll show you where that lines up. And then I took a scale, a straight edge, and I laid it on so I could have the line that I wanted to what I was going to cut. So basically, and if I can, this is really tricky to get around this. So if I put where this cut line is, my marker, basically I went to the bottom edge of that same impression there. So drew my line down, and then I drilled a hole here. So wherever the straight line came to, that's where I drilled the hole. This was just kind of a rough. I mean, there's no specific way to do this, but by doing that, I could then cut this loose, and I had to go on the inside and cut it because I could not get the grinder inside here. So I cut it on the inside, cut this line, and cut across, and then work my way that direction. Now, I've tack welded this so that it'll stay in position, because you saw that I was putting the clamp on there to hold it. What I want to do is put the rotor back on, put the wheel on, and see how much clearance there is now. Also, what I'm thinking about doing is removing this, because this was designed as a bumper or bump mount for the original design of the rear end. And I'm not sure that TCI intends for this to be here or interact. So I may just remove that. You can see it sticks out past this part, or this part of the wheelhouse. So it's probably a good ½ inch or maybe more that sticks out. So I may cut that off. I don't know yet. It's not gonna be used anyway, but I'll take a look at it after I get the wheel back on. Now I want to point out, these tires and wheels were what I had on my '68 Jade Mustang, and this tire size, 255 40 ZR17. This is a 9-inch rim, and this tire is really wide, just so you know. We still have a little bit of clearance up there on the top, and now with this layout we actually have clearance at the front. So just cutting a little and moving some metal makes a huge difference. And you don't really think about it, but that's clearance that's necessary. So maybe a mini tub. So I'm going to continue to work on that. I'm going to get a filler piece made to fill that in, and then I'll trim the excess that's inside and get that welded together. But that made a big difference. These tires, let me get a tape measure just so you know. So eyeballing this as square as I can be with the tire, come across, we are at really about 10 3/8, maybe 10.5 inches. So that's a lot of tire to have under there, and it clears. So I'll do the same thing on this side as I demonstrated. I'll be doing that same similar cutout that I did, and then push this side over as well. And there you can see how far in that goes as it is. At this point, I have cut the wheelhouse and allowed it to move inboard, and I also had cut the floor pan so that it would make room for that to move back. And hopefully you can see this okay. At this point, I have welded this back together. Now what I need to do is make a filler piece for right here. So, you know, it's just like a long triangle kind of shape, and I'm going to use some leftover metal I had from the firewall from the '69, because remember I had to cut that firewall and salvage basically half of it. So I want to keep using the same kind of metal. So here is the firewall, and basically this is just a piece, you know, a part of the firewall. So this is the passenger side, if I remember correctly. Yeah, passenger side. And this is just on that bottom edge. So I always hang on to stuff like this just because you never know when you might need it. Now I've got this throatless shear that I use, and I've already drawn out just a rough line. And this shear is really nice because you can just clamp it onto your bench like I've done here and just cut. And it works really well. You know, sometimes I may use a cut-off wheel or grinder, but this is very convenient. I recommend everybody has one of these if you're doing any kind of sheet metal work. Okay, so now I have that piece. You know, the nice part about little pieces of metal like this is you can just bend them wherever you need them to go. And this is maybe just a little bigger than what it needs to be, but you get the idea. I'll take this, and I may even hammer it out a little bit. It's got a little curve to it now, or where it was part of that panel. But what I'll do is get this down inside there, and I may even come in from the other side just to see how I can get it to fit. So I could just keep bringing it in. Let me take these out of the way for a second. Just keep bringing it in like this, and basically that's my filler. A little bit of sanding, a little bit of trimming, and I'll make that fit, and then weld that back together, and this will be good to go. Now later on, there's a gap down here. I may make a filler piece just to fill that in, because this is just how it comes. You know, the wheelhouse stops, and I haven't cut any of this. This is just where it's at. So I'll probably address that later on, but for now I want to get this part finished, and there you go. Just make it. That'll work. Now, after I've already cut this piece on the throatless shear, I decided to clean up the edges of the cuts that I'd made, and I started sanding down this piece with my little air sander there. I managed to get the compressor working, and I thought I'll just sand it down. But then I realized that's going to take a while and use up a lot of air, and the compressor's already a problem. So I swapped over to the 4.5-inch grinder, and I started sanding it down. And the more I looked at it, the more I realized, hey, I just need to shear off some more metal. So I went back to the shear. I trimmed off a sliver of material there, and that was almost enough. It fit very close. So just cleaning it up a little more with the sander there, and then I put it in place, and I drew 2 lines to indicate where that body crease is, or that stamping in the wheelhouse. Used a pair of pliers, needle nose pliers, just to try to replicate that shape somewhat. And after a few tries, I was able to get it to fit the car as I wanted it to. This metal is so soft and malleable, it doesn't take much to reshape it, even just using your hands. Sand it a little bit there and get it to fit, and it stayed in place pretty much on its own. Now I'm using the Yes Welder DP200, and I'm actually using 30 thousandths wire here. I've talked about it before. I've used 024, 025 wire in the past, and for most sheet metal work, that's fine. However, I've got 30 thousandths in the machine, and you can fine tune this machine with the metal thickness. So you basically hit the reset button, and you can adjust how thick the metal is, and it'll compensate for that. So I really do like this machine a lot. I've had people ask me what welder would I use, and right now I'm very, very happy with the DP200. So there's links in my description for that welder through Yes Welder if you're interested. If not, that's fine too. I'm just letting you know. So I went through and I tack welded these various locations, and I sometimes use like a screwdriver to adjust the gap. So I think I showed it, or may have shown it earlier, but right here. So I take that little screwdriver and I'm just kind of flexing the metal to get it to match up better. Hold the screwdriver on there, do a little tack, and adjust again, and it's fine. So I went ahead and welded this together, short sections here and there, filled in the top, and metal, a little more adjusting. And once it's in place and done, then I can move on to sanding this down. So pretty happy with how it turned out. I get out the 4.5-inch grinder, start knocking down the high metal, and once I get pretty happy with that, I switch over to the little air sander, just because it's easier to get in there and finesse the small portions of the weld. So the 4.5-inch works great for the initial start, and then the little one to help smooth that up. And then once it was done, I went back and I cut off the very bottom piece that was hanging out down below, because it was not necessary to have that. All right, I feel pretty good about how this has turned out. This slice and dice and chop and move has created at least 1/2 inch, maybe 3/4 of an inch of space for the tire to travel in this radius. And as I showed you in time lapse, I welded this all together, so I'm pretty happy with that. Once this is primed and undercoated, it's all going to blend in and look pretty good. So, little things like this pay off in the end. And I've always talked about it, that you need to test fit your parts before you get to the final assembly or whatever. So this little brake fitting has been probably the bigger headache out of all this. And I feel good about it now, after talking with Sal at TCI and getting his approval for what my idea was, which is welding in that filler piece underneath. I'm pretty happy with that. So I don't I know I don't have that problem on the other side because we don't have the panhard bar, so I'm not going to worry about that. I still need to cut the other side wheelhouse, get it pushed back, make some room. And you know, when you're doing this stuff, tools just tend to accumulate. And I want to just say I've come up with had an idea. Somebody may have already created this. I don't know. I thought about creating a something that would hang on this arm so that I could lay tools here. And when I do that, it would move with the car when it moves up and down. Right now, I just kind of set stuff up on top, and half the time I knock it off, and it ends up down there on the floor. So, anyway, that's where we're at with this process, and I'm feeling pretty good about the back of this right now. I'm using my white pointer because I don't know where the green one is. I think it's up inside the car. When I was showing the inside earlier, when I had the GoPro on, I had it in there, and I think I left it in there. So using the white pointer. Now, I'm going to continue on with the test fitting, adjusting whatever I need to do to make everything fit. And I think the next phase is going to be pulling that mock-up engine and transmission out and setting the real stuff in there. Also, I think I talked about this earlier, I was sent some pictures of a transmission mount that is used by Revology. So what they have done is they've modified the TCI setup to their own design, I guess, and they built a transmission mount onto that front crosspiece that I talked about previously. I'm going to do something very similar to what they did. I'm not going to modify the TCI part like they did. I'm going to keep it the way it is, but I probably build a tongue or tang system to support the transmission. But I won't do any of that until I have the real thing in there. So that'll be the next phase, is getting the engine back in there and mocking everything with the real stuff. Also, I've ordered some other parts. I talked about the modules on the back of the engine, and I've ordered the block-off plates for that. So I'll talk about that more in the next video. There's still a lot more to do, but I want you to stay tuned. If you would, leave a comment, leave a thumbs up. Keep this moving. Right now, the only thing keeping me doing these videos is my patrons, and I'm 100% honest about that. My revenue from YouTube continues to drop and drop and drop, and especially in January and February, it gets even worse. It's dropped 25% already since December, and it's just frustrating. My patrons, they support me independent of YouTube, and I would much rather post videos on Patreon, but I need to keep the ball rolling with YouTube as well, because there's a lot of people that benefit from the videos that I make. And like I said, if it wasn't for the patrons, I probably wouldn't even post on YouTube anymore. So if you're interested, there's a link in the description box down below. There's also a link for anything else today, any tools that I use, Amazon, parts or equipment I promote. And if you want something from that, there's links down below as well. So that'll be it for this video. And until next time, take care of yourselves. See ya.